The discovery. The stars above the barren outpost flickered as if they knew something was about to change forever. The alien research vessel Serath had docked in silence, its crew tense with excitement and unease. They had captured several humans after a border skirmish on the edge of Council space. The prisoners were quiet now, strapped to medical beds in a sterile white chamber deep inside the vessel. The scientists, tall insectoid beings with translucent limbs and glowing eyes, gathered around the first subject. They had studied hundreds of species before, but something about humans unsettled them. The lead researcher, Valor, adjusted his tools and leaned close to the monitor as the machine scanned the prisoner's veins. What he saw made his jaw tremble. The blood flowing through the human's body was not red in the way most carbon-based species carried it. It shimmered like polished steel, shifting in smooth ripples, almost alive. Valor's mandibles clicked, nervously as he motioned for the others to see. One by one, the scientists froze as the image expanded across the screens. Metallic liquid streamed through the arteries, glowing faintly, as if it carried both life and power. Whispers filled the lab, though none dared to speak too loud. The data made no sense. By all known laws of biology, no creature could sustain metallic fluid in its body. It should poison cells, destroy tissues, end life in seconds. Yet the human prisoner lay breathing calmly, eyes closed, chest rising and falling as if this strange truth was nothing unusual. Another scientist, Myron, tried to pierce the skin for a deeper sample. The moment the needle entered, the blood surged forward, coating the instrument in a silvery sheen. The sample writhed and hardened like molten iron cooling into a blade. The alien recoiled in horror and fascination. The alarms inside the research vessel whispered warnings. The machines could not classify the blood. Its molecular pattern shifted constantly as though adapting to each probe and attempt to measure it. Valor demanded silence and ran the scans again, but the results only deepened the mystery. The human had liquid metal flowing through his veins, bonded perfectly with organic cells. It moved with purpose, reinforcing the body, repairing minor damage as it occurred, even amplifying oxygen transfer beyond natural limits. It was both blood and machine, a secret hidden inside what the Council had always called a primitive species. Word spread quickly through the ship. Crew members who had never feared prisoners before now kept their distance. They whispered that perhaps humans were not natural at all, that maybe they were engineered weapons disguised as flesh. Others believed Earth must hold forbidden technology from before the Council's rise. As rumors grew, the atmosphere thickened with dread. The prisoner opened his eyes at last. His gaze was calm, steady, and without fear. He did not resist the bindings, but the look in his eyes unsettled the researchers more than the blood. It was the look of someone who already knew the secret being revealed. Valor stepped forward, trying to mask his unease, and asked in his clicking voice what humans were hiding. The prisoner only smiled faintly and remained silent. The scientists worked through the night, desperate to understand what they had uncovered. Samples from the other prisoners confirmed the same shocking truth. All humans carried the liquid metal within them, though each reacted slightly differently, suggesting a natural evolution rather than artificial design. The crew argued whether to alert the Galactic Council immediately or keep the secret until they could explain it. But even in their fear, they knew the discovery could not be contained for long. Outside the medical chamber, soldiers whispered among themselves. If human blood was truly living metal, what did that mean for war? A wound that bled liquid steel might seal itself faster than blades could cut. A soldier with such blood could march through fire and return stronger. Already fear gnawed at their minds. If the galaxy learned this secret, panic would follow. If enemies of the Council learned it first, they would seek alliances with Earth. No one could deny the truth. The humans were not what the galaxy thought they were. Valor sat alone at his console, staring at the endless data streams. His thoughts spiraled between wonder and dread. Every time he replayed the scans, he saw the impossible made real. He whispered to himself that perhaps evolution on Earth had demanded such strength. Perhaps the world was so harsh that only blood made of living metal could keep life alive. If so, then humanity had survived where no other race could. That thought chilled him deeper than the cold of space. The human prisoner finally spoke as the chamber dimmed into artificial night. His voice was quiet, yet carried strength that made even the guards step closer to listen. He said they were only beginning to understand and that what flowed through his veins was not a weapon, but a warning. Then he closed his eyes again, leaving the room silent. The aliens exchanged fearful glances, realizing this was only the beginning of a truth too vast to ignore. Part 2. The Debate. The next morning aboard the Sarath, the council delegation arrived after being summoned in secret by Vaylor and his team. A tall chamber in the ship was prepared where alien leaders of many species gathered, each draped in ceremonial robes or armored suits that marked their station. They expected news of another simple border conflict, but the moment the screens displayed the image of human blood coursing through veins like flowing steel, the room fell into stunned silence. No one spoke for a long moment until finally, a reptilian delegate hissed that such a thing was not possible and must be a trick. Vaylor presented the data collected over long hours of scanning the prisoners, showing graphs, shifting molecules, and live feeds of the human lying calmly as the liquid metal inside him continued to defy every law of biology. The delegates leaned forward, their eyes wide, some in horror and some in fascination. Arguments broke out almost immediately. The insectoid delegates claimed humans must be machines masquerading as flesh, and that they had no place in biological councils. The amphibian scholars countered that no machine could adapt at the cellular level in such a seamless way, and insisted that this was the result of brutal evolution on a hostile world. Others whispered that Earth must hold ancient technology from a forgotten empire, and that humans had hidden it from the galaxy for centuries. The chamber filled with accusations and counter-arguments, the sound of many species shouting over one another, until the commanding voice of High Delegate Arvoth silenced them. Arvoth was an elder from a long-lived crystalline race whose body shimmered like glass beneath starlight. He declared that whatever the truth might be, humanity represented a threat to the balance of the galaxy. He demanded that research be centralized under council control and that no information be allowed to leak beyond those walls. His voice echoed with authority, but even as he spoke, the other delegates shifted uneasily. Secrets this large never stayed buried. The prisoner was brought into the chamber, his wrists bound but his steps steady. He walked as if the eyes of dozens of powerful species did not weigh upon him. Arvoth looked down and demanded an explanation, asking whether humans were crafted in labs or if their blood was the result of tampering with forbidden technology. The human simply raised his head and said that Earth was a world that did not forgive weakness, a place where storms stronger than fleets and beasts larger than warships tested life every single day. He explained no further, leaving silence hanging in the chamber. His calm voice carried something none of the delegates could ignore. It was not arrogance, it was not fear. It was certainty born from survival. Myran, the younger scientist who had taken the first blood sample, whispered to the assembly that the liquid metal inside humans did more than heal wounds. It adapted. Already scans showed changes in response to their instruments, adjusting structures within seconds. Myran trembled as he suggested that in combat, human blood could harden to resist plasma burns or shift its flow to clot faster than any known treatment. The chamber erupted again. Some shouted that humans were invincible monsters waiting to conquer the stars. Others argued that perhaps humans had no wish for conquest at all, but simply carried this adaptation as a curse of their world. Fear grew thicker with each word. Images of armies of soldiers with liquid metal blood filled the minds of generals. Visions of entire fleets falling to warriors who refused to die haunted the minds of politicians. Whispers turned into frantic strategies about containment, surveillance, and possible extermination before humanity realized the advantage it held. But a few voices urged caution. An elder from the avian species reminded the chamber that fear had led the council into needless wars before. He asked whether anyone had seen evidence of human aggression beyond defending their home. He reminded them that the humans had not come to council space seeking conquest. They had been dragged here as prisoners. His words calmed the storm for a moment. though unease still clung to every face. The prisoner stood in silence, watching them argue over his people as if they were objects on a board. He gave no sign of anger, only that same faint smile he had worn in the medical chamber. To him it was clear the galaxy had never faced a species like his before, and the more they debated, the more they revealed their fear. The delegates did not realize that in their desperate arguments, they were already acknowledging humanity as something beyond their control. As the meeting ended, Arvoth declared that the council would convene on the capital world to decide the fate of Earth and its people. Guards led the human away, but as the doors closed, his voice echoed behind him. He said quietly that secrets once uncovered could never be hidden again, and that the galaxy would have to choose whether to fear humanity or to stand beside it. His words lingered in the minds of every delegate long after he was gone. The Sarath floated silently in the void as messages sped across stars carrying the shocking truth. In every corner of the council worlds, whispers spread about the species with liquid metal veins, about the humans who might not be mere mortals, but something far more enduring. The debate had only just begun, but already the galaxy trembled at what it had discovered. The secret revealed. The journey to the council capital took many days, and during that time the prisoners remained under heavy guard, yet no attempt was made to harm them. The scientists continued their study in secret, but answers were difficult to find because the blood itself seemed alive, changing slightly each time they thought they understood it. Some began to believe it was more than a quirk of evolution, that it carried memory, that it remembered wounds and reshaped itself to prevent them from happening again. While the researchers argued, the human prisoner named Elias began to speak more freely. He was not loud and never raised his voice, but when he did speak, the room grew quiet. He explained that on Earth survival had always been cruel. Long before humans built cities, they faced storms that could strip the land bare, beasts with teeth like swords, and sicknesses that swept through whole tribes. To endure such a world, their bodies had to change and adapt. The liquid metal within them was not a gift, it was a demand from their world, a relentless push to make them strong or see them die. As Elias spoke, the scientists listened, though they struggled to believe. He told them of volcanoes that poured rivers of fire, of oceans that could swallow ships whole, of mountains that punished the weak with cold and thin air, and of deserts where only those who could endure endless heat and thirst survived. He told them that in such a place blood had to become more than fluid, it had to become armor and healer at once. The researchers looked at one another in disbelief, for no other world they knew carried so many extremes. One scientist from a watery world muttered that if even half of what he said was true, then Earth was not a planet but a crucible. The council elders arrived at last on the capital world, a city of towers stretching into clouds and ships weaving endlessly through the skies. The prisoners were paraded into the grand hall where thousands of eyes watched, curious, fearful, and hungry for truth. Valor and Myron presented their findings again, but this time Elias stood beside them. He was unbroken, his back straight, his eyes calm. Arvoth demanded once more to know the truth, and this time Elias did not hold back. He explained that humans had not asked for their strange blood. It had been forced upon them by countless generations of survival. He described how their ancestors who bled like other species did not live long enough to pass on their line, but those who carried even traces of metallic elements in their veins endured a little longer, healed a little faster, fought a little harder, until finally the adaptation was not rare but universal. Over thousands of years it became natural, until every human was born with veins that shimmered with living metal. The chamber fell into uneasy silence as his words spread. Delegates whispered that if such adaptation was possible, then humans might not yet be finished changing. Some worried aloud that under new threats, they might become something even greater, perhaps something the galaxy could never face in battle. The thought terrified them because the Council's power was built on the assumption that no species could change quickly enough to resist its might. Elias looked at them and told them that survival was the first lesson every human learned, and that no matter the challenge, humans did not yield. One delegate scoffed that if humans were so powerful, they would have already conquered the stars. Elias simply said that they had been busy surviving their own world. The answer struck deeper than any boast because the delegates realized that if Earth itself had been enough to occupy the strength of this species, then the wider galaxy might not be ready for what would happen when humans turned their gaze outward. Myron stepped forward and confirmed with trembling voice that their tests supported everything Elias had said. They had exposed the human blood to heat, cold, radiation, and poisons, and every time it shifted in structure to survive. Sometimes it hardened. Sometimes it became thinner and faster, but always it endured. The council chamber grew restless. Some called for immediate restrictions, others demanded to learn from humanity, and a few feared they were staring at the end of their dominance. For the first time in memory, the council could not agree. Every faction saw something different in humanity. To the generals, they were a threat. To the scientists, they were a miracle. To the politicians, they were an opportunity. And to the common citizens, they were a story spreading like wildfire. The story of a people with liquid metal in their veins who walked calmly into the heart of the galaxy, as if they feared nothing. As the meeting ended, Elias was led back to confinement, but he glanced once at the stars beyond the window and smiled faintly. He knew the galaxy now understood the secret of his people, and he knew fear and wonder would spread far faster than ships. Humanity's truth was no longer hidden, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again. Fear and strategy, the council. Chamber was no longer a place of unity, but of suspicion and fear. After the revelation of Elias and the confirmation of the scientists, the delegates could not sleep. Across the capital world, voices rose in private meetings, each faction gathering to decide what must be done. The generals from the reptilian dominions were the loudest, insisting that humanity must be contained immediately before their secret spread any further. They feared that soldiers who could bleed liquid steel would march through fire and return to the battlefield within moments, rendering every weapon of the council useless. These generals demanded swift and decisive action. Others, particularly the merchants and politicians, hesitated. They had studied humanity's limited trade and scattered colonies and saw a chance not for war but for profit. If human blood could resist death itself, then it might be harvested, sold, and used to create treatments for diseases that plagued countless worlds. Their greed battled with their fear, leaving the chamber restless and divided. Arvoth, the crystalline elder, tried to impose order. His voice echoed through the tall halls as he warned that history had seen empires fall because they ignored small sparks until those sparks grew into firestorms. He told them that if they underestimated humanity now, they would regret it. But his call for action was met with doubt. The avian elder once again reminded the council that they had no evidence humanity sought conquest, and he asked what crime had been committed by a people who had only been dragged into the chamber as prisoners. The argument hung heavy, for it revealed a truth none wanted to admit. Humanity had not started this conflict. The council had. In the meantime, Elias remained in his cell. Guards watched him carefully, but unease lingered in their eyes. They saw how quickly his wounds closed after a simple scratch. They whispered to one another that if the bindings were removed, he could break free at any moment. Elias never tested them, never moved against them, yet the very possibility gnawed at their courage. Fear was spreading not because of what he had done, but because of what he might do. Within the laboratories, Myron pushed his studies further. He had become both obsessed and terrified by what he found. The liquid metal within the blood seemed to respond to stress signals from the body faster than thought itself, rushing to areas of damage and strengthening tissues before they could fail. He had watched in disbelief as Elias's body healed burns within hours that would leave others scarred for life. The data was undeniable, and Myron began to worry what would happen if humanity was forced into open conflict. He carried his reports to the council leaders, but they only deepened the panic already building. Rumors began to race through the city. Citizens whispered that the humans carried weapons inside their own bodies. Some feared they would soon rise up. Others whispered admiration and even hope, dreaming that such strength could be shared with other races. Street gatherings formed where people argued whether the council should embrace or destroy the new species. For the first time in centuries, the authority of the council seemed fragile, shaken not by fleets or armies, but by the veins of one human standing quietly under guard. A secret meeting of the military leaders was called. They spoke of strategies to contain humanity, of building weapons designed to overwhelm even a body of liquid steel. Some suggested isolating Earth entirely, cutting it off from the galaxy, until its people withered. Others suggested extermination, though none said it openly, for the thought itself carried shame. A few suggested assimilation, taking humans into the council by force and using their power for the greater whole. Yet, beneath all their strategies lay a truth they did not voice. They were afraid, truly afraid, and fear made their hands tremble more than any battle had before. Elias was summoned once more before the council. He stood in the circle of light, chains at his wrists, yet his gaze held steady. Arvoth asked him if his people would rise against the galaxy, if they would use their strange blood to seek dominion. Elias shook his head slowly and said humanity had no desire to rule others, but that they would never kneel either. His voice carried across the chamber with the weight of certainty. He warned them that if they struck against Earth, the world that had forged his people, they would learn what it meant to fight against survival itself. His words sent a shiver across the assembly. The council dismissed him back to his cell, but the echoes of his warning lingered long after. The leaders sat in silence, some filled with doubt, some with anger, and some with awe. They had thought themselves masters of the galaxy, but now they wondered if the galaxy itself had chosen a new master. Humanity strikes back. The council's debates stretched into long days, but while they argued, Earth had already moved. Across the void of space, human fleets gathered in silence, their ships dark and cold to avoid detection. These vessels were not the largest in the galaxy, nor the most advanced, yet they carried crews forged in the same crucible that had shaped the blood of their people. Every man and woman aboard knew that their kin had been captured and paraded before alien eyes, and that insult was one Earth could not allow. At first the council believed it had time, that secrecy and distance would keep humanity docile. But when the first human fleet appeared at the edge of the capital system, the illusion of control was shattered. The alarms rang through the great orbital defenses. Scouts rushed to report that the human ships were advancing with purpose. The commanders in the council military laughed at the sight. To them, these ships looked crude compared to their gleaming fleets powered by centuries of refinement. They thought the humans had come to offer a hopeless show of defiance. Arvoth and a handful of others did not laugh. They remembered the blood. They remembered the calm certainty in Elias's voice. And when the battle began, they understood what they had failed to see. Human ships moved with reckless patterns that confused the council's tactical systems. They did not keep rigid formations but surged and darted like predators circling prey. When council weapons struck, the hulls of human vessels burned and cracked, yet within minutes repairs began as crews worked with a fury no one had ever witnessed. Where other species fled when hit, humans charged forward, their wounded ships, spewing fire yet refusing to fall. Inside, soldiers with liquid metal veins fought in corridors filled with smoke and broken steel, sealing breaches with their own bodies until repairs could be made. On the ground, another force descended. Human Marines landed on a council supply station, their armor scorched from orbital fire. Yet they advanced as if untouched. Plasma bolts tore through them, and still they rose again, blood shining like silver as wounds closed with unnatural speed. Alien defenders who had never faltered in battle found their courage failing as these warriors refused to die. Stories spread among the defenders that human veins carried not only life but vengeance, that every drop of their blood was forged to defy death itself. The council's generals demanded explanations from their scientists. Myron whispered that he had warned them that human blood adapted faster than any weapon. Every shot that struck them became less effective as their bodies learned how to resist. It was not mere healing, it was evolution unfolding in moments. Arvoth listened in silence, realizing the council had awoken something it could not contain. Meanwhile, aboard the Serath, Elias felt the tremors of battle through the walls. Guards ran in panic, unsure whether to hold their prisoner or flee. He simply stood calm as ever, and said softly that his people had come for him. The fear in the guards' eyes grew deeper than any order could mask. They had believed the humans, few in number, but now they saw fleets pressing against the might of the council itself. Above the capital, the clash raged for hours. Council fleets outnumbered the humans, but for every human ship destroyed, another seemed to emerge from the dark, and for every marine who fell, two more pushed forward, their veins gleaming like molten rivers under fractured armor. The galaxy watched in horror and awe as transmissions leaked beyond the capital system, showing images of men and women fighting with blood like living metal, their strength beyond reason, their will unbreakable. When the first council warship fell, split apart by human boarding teams who carved through its defenses and planted charges deep within, the laughter of the generals died. They saw the truth at last. Humanity was not playing at war. Humanity was reminding the galaxy that survival itself was their greatest weapon. Arvoth stood before the chamber windows, gazing at the burning skies. He whispered that the galaxy was changing, that they were no longer masters of fate. Behind him, the other delegates whispered plans of retreat, surrender, or desperate escalation, but none of them could ignore the sight above, where humans bled silver fire and turned their pain into power. The galactic war turns. The flames of battle above the council capital did not fade with the first victory. Instead, they grew into a storm that swept across the stars. News of humanity's defiance traveled faster than any fleet. In distant systems, alien citizens gathered in fearful silence as transmissions replayed the same haunting images. Humans rising from wounds that should have ended them, veins glowing like rivers of molten silver, soldiers pushing forward with a fury that no one could match. These were not whispers anymore, but undeniable proof that a new force had stepped onto the galactic stage. The council scrambled to respond. Generals pushed fleets into position, admirals sent orders to fortresses, and propaganda machines roared to life, warning that humanity was a plague that must be cut out before it spread. Yet beneath the speeches and commands lay a deep unease. Commanders who once believed in their own invincibility now studied battle reports filled with horrors they had never imagined. Entire platoons had emptied their weapons into human warriors, only to watch them stand again moments later. Fleet captains wrote in trembling words that boarding actions failed because human blood hardened against blades and burned against plasma, turning wounds into scars before death could come. On Earth, the call to arms spread through cities and colonies like fire through dry grass. The capture of Elias and the whispers of what had been done to him stirred fury in every heart. Factories roared as ships were built faster than ever. Pilots strapped themselves into fighters and soldiers kissed families goodbye, knowing they might never return. They did not march for conquest, but for kin. Humanity had always fought hardest not for land or wealth, but for one another. And now their veins carried both blood and metal into the void. The council soon realized the scale of their mistake. They had believed the humans, few in number, contained on a single world and its scattered colonies. What they had not understood was that humanity thrived under hardship. Every colony born in the harshness of frontier space had prepared its people for survival beyond measure. Now those colonies poured their strength into the war effort, and fleets that should not have existed appeared from asteroid belts, icy moons, and forgotten stations. It seemed as if every human, wherever they had been scattered, rose together as one. The war spread system by system. At first, the council won battles through sheer numbers, overwhelming human ships with firepower and crushing smaller outposts. But even in victory, the council bled. For each human death seemed to inspire 10 more fighters to rise. Their blood did not simply heal, it inspired, for soldiers watched comrades stand from wounds and refused to retreat. Soon, alien mercenaries, who once fought for the council, began to desert, unwilling to face an enemy that ignored pain and turned every defeat into fuel for vengeance. Myron continued his research even as the war raged. He confessed in secret to Arvoth that the council could not win in the long run. The blood inside humans did not only adapt to wounds, but also to weapons themselves. Each time a new kind of energy beam struck them, Their cells learned faster, until entire units could resist damage that once tore them apart. Myron spoke in a broken voice, saying that humanity was not fighting at their full strength yet. He warned that the longer the war lasted, the stronger they would become. Arvoth listened and felt the heavy weight of inevitability pressing down like gravity. On the front lines, alien commanders began to whisper the same words. They saw fleets crumble not because they lacked strength, but because they lacked will. Human ships burned but did not fall. Human soldiers bled silver fire, but did not die. Entire worlds surrendered rather than face such foes. Panic spread through the Council's outer systems as rumors grew that humanity could not be stopped, that their veins carried not only metal, but destiny. Elias was freed when human boarding teams struck the Serath and broke his chains. He walked among his rescuers with calm dignity, greeting them with nods rather than cheers. When asked what the Council would do next, he simply said they would fear, and in their fear they would destroy themselves. His words spread quickly among the fleets, carried as both warning and hope. To his people he became a symbol, proof that even in the heart of enemy power, a human could stand unbroken. As months passed, the galaxy began to shift. Allies of the Council turned away. Neutral states sought negotiations with Earth, and once powerful factions now sent envoys begging for peace. The war had not yet reached its end, but already the balance of power was tilting. The galaxy that once mocked humanity now watched them with trembling awe, for they had proven that no empire could match the will of a species that carried survival itself in their veins. The final truth. The galaxy was no longer the same after the first waves of war. Stars that once glittered under the rule of the Council now shone under the shadow of uncertainty. Every world had heard the stories, every species had seen the images, and no one could deny what had been revealed. Humans were no longer considered fragile wanderers from a distant blue planet. They had become something larger, something unstoppable, a force that carried the weight of survival itself. The Council clung to its pride, but even its leaders felt the truth deep within. Their fleets were cracked, their soldiers weary, their citizens restless. The war they had unleashed had turned against them, and the fear they had once tried to spread now consumed them instead. On Earth, the call for unity had never been louder. Families that had once lived in quiet isolation joined hands with strangers as fleets prepared to leave orbit. Every city roared with the sound of industry, and every child grew up knowing they were part of something greater. Humanity was not fighting only for survival anymore. They were fighting to show the galaxy who they truly were. They were no longer hiding behind borders, no longer content to be overlooked. With veins of silver, they carried their message in fire and steel. The turning point came when the Council summoned all of its remaining fleets to defend its core worlds. Admirals swore they would break the humans once and for all. They gathered, ships in numbers not seen in centuries, a wall of power stretching across the stars. Yet when the battle began, the wall crumbled, not from lack of weapons, but from lack of spirit. Human ships charged like predators unleashed, refusing to hold, defensive lines diving deep into enemy formations and tearing them apart from within. Soldiers boarded vessels at reckless speeds, their wounds sealing as they fought, their determination unshaken by pain. Council commanders who had sworn victory found themselves paralyzed as report after report told the same story. The humans would not stop. Elias stood on the bridge of a flagship now, not as a prisoner but as a voice for his people. His calm presence guided the fleets, not with orders shouted in desperation, but with certainty that carried through every channel. He told them the galaxy was watching, and that they were not fighting to destroy but to reveal. His words became the heartbeat of the war. Soldiers who were exhausted rose again. Pilots who faced impossible odds found courage, and entire crews fought with the knowledge that they were part of a truth larger than themselves. When the Council's capital finally opened its gates, it was not through annihilation, but through surrender. Delegates who once shouted for humanity's destruction now bowed their heads as human envoys walked into the Grand Hall. No weapon had forced their knees to bend. It was fear, awe, and the realization that resistance meant extinction. They had seen what humans could do in battle, how their blood carried both life and death, and they knew no strategy could overcome such will. Elias addressed them with a steady voice. He told them that humanity did not seek to enslave or conquer, but neither would they bow to any power again. He said that Earth had always been a crucible, shaping its children in storms and fire, and now the galaxy itself had become the new crucible. He reminded them that survival had always been the first lesson and that it would remain the last. His words echoed across the chamber, carried by transmissions to every corner of space. For the first time in history, the council listened not as masters but as students. Across the galaxy, worlds trembled, but they also listened. Some feared, some admired, some whispered of alliances. Whatever their feelings, they could no longer ignore the truth. Humanity had risen, humanity had endured. Humanity had proven that even when facing empires and armadas, they could not be broken. The liquid metal flowing through their veins was more than biology. It was a symbol, a reminder that survival shapes strength and that no force can silence a people forged by struggle. The council surrendered its authority and pledged peace not because it wished to, but because it had no choice. And as Elias walked out of the grand hall, free among his people, the galaxy looked upon him and upon humanity with a mixture of fear and reverence. They knew a new chapter had begun, one that would not be written by empires of crystal or fleets, of reptiles or courts of amphibians. It would be written by the species that had carried liquid steel inside their bodies and unshakable will inside their souls. And so the war ended not with destruction, but with revelation. Humanity stood as both warning and promise. The galaxy could bow in fear or it could stand in unity, but either way it would never again forget the truth of the species born on Earth. Humanity was no longer overlooked. Humanity was no longer underestimated. Humanity had become the story that every star would remember. A new dawn, the galaxy slowly settled after the fires of war, but the echoes of what had happened would never fade. The council halls that once carried the voices of arrogant leaders now carried a quieter tone, one of caution and reflection. Across countless worlds, people spoke the same words, that humanity had changed everything. The fear that had once driven fleets against Earth was still there, yet alongside it was something new, a reluctant respect that could not be erased. For every commander who trembled at the thought of liquid metal veins, there was also a farmer or merchant who wondered if humanity's strength could bring protection rather than destruction. Elias returned to Earth not as a prisoner, but as a figure who carried the weight of a new age. When he walked through the streets of his home city, people reached out to touch him, not as a ruler, but as a reminder that they had stood together and endured. He spoke to them not of conquest, but of responsibility, saying that strength meant nothing if it was used only to dominate, that survival meant more when it was shared. His words were carried across the stars as a promise that humanity would not become what the council had feared, but neither would they ever again allow themselves to be forgotten. The human fleets did not disband. They remained ready, standing guard not as aggressors, but as sentinels. The memory of chains and the humiliation of captivity burned too deeply to ever be ignored, so Earth would always be prepared. Yet their ships also carried envoys, scientists, and explorers who ventured into corners of the galaxy where fear had once ruled. They offered aid to struggling colonies, medicine to dying worlds, and strength to those who had known only weakness under the shadow of empires. Slowly, the story of humanity began to shift from terror to legend, from enemy to savior. The council that remained was no longer the master of all. It had become a gathering of voices, smaller but perhaps wiser. Its members had seen their power broken and understood that nothing built on fear could last. They now listened more carefully to those they once dismissed, and in every meeting, they remembered the silver blood that had humbled them. Elias sat among them at times, not to rule but to remind. His calm presence was a weight they could not ignore, a symbol of what humanity had endured and what it still carried forward. Generations, later children across the stars would be told stories of the humans who bled metal and stood unbroken before the mightiest empire. They would be told that in the darkest time, when all believed the galaxy belonged to the council, a single people rose and showed them the truth. That survival is the greatest strength, That will is sharper than any blade, and that unity born in hardship can shake the heavens. The storytellers would speak of Earth as both a warning and a beacon, and the name of humanity would be spoken with awe long after the last council ship had rusted into dust. The galaxy had been changed forever, and no one could return to the time before. Humanity had claimed its place not by conquest alone, but by proving that nothing could break a people who carried the fire of survival in their veins. And as the stars turned slowly in the endless night, the story of liquid metal blood and unshakable will became a truth written into the fabric of history, a truth that would endure as long as the galaxies themselves endured. The end.